So, in this segment, we're going to be talking about the government mulling a stealth tax to pay for more lorry parks. So, I'm sure the people of Kent will be really happy about seeing more lorry parks and 24-hour lights ruining the night sky. I'm sure they're going to be really happy about this. But they knew what they voted for. So, a minister has not ruled out the idea of a tax on the haulage industry to meet the cost of providing more facilities for lorries. Now, what does this mean? This is a stealth tax. Why? Because who do you think is going to pay for this? Because the haulage companies are going to pass it on to whoever's buying the products, and that person is going to pass it on to the consumer. So it's a stealth tax. They don't want to raise actual taxes, income tax, or capital gains tax to fund this stuff. So what they're doing is taxing the haulage companies, which will be passed on to the consumer. A stealth tax, especially with the cost of living now and the price of food going up dramatically. This is not good. So a minister has not ruled out the idea of a tax on the haulage industry to meet the costs of providing more facilities for lorries. Transport Minister Baroness Veer of Norbiton, such a stupid... The fact that we still have Lords is ridiculous. Acknowledged the idea was quite radical, but could go some way improving the number of lorry parks in Kent and beyond. The problem is getting planning permission for stuff like this is quite difficult because councils don't want to see this stuff. And what happened, I think, with some of the bigger lorry parks in Kent is the government kind of did it by stealth, built the lorry parks by stealth, in a sense, in order to kind of bypass the council. But the fact is, people don't want to see this stuff, and we wouldn't need lorry parks or this stealth tax if it wasn't for Brexit. Let's be real here. This stuff is new. Look at the size of the monster as well. So Baroness Veer was being quizzed about the road freight supply chain by the Cross-Party Transport Select Committee. She was asked by committee chairman, our favourite MP, Hugh Merriman, if you know, you know. Given the problems of paying for new sites and securing planning permission, there was a case of some kind of levy that could be imposed. A levy is code for tax. The minister replied, "It is definitely something that has crossed my mind. The low tax Tory party has mulled over tax increases again, but it's not something I want to do as a first step. I have thought about it. It is quite radical and not what you might want to see. And the question is, how is it going to work? How much extra tax are these lorries going to have to pay?" Merriman said it could be the equivalent of a sugar tax for the industry to meet the costs of better parking facilities. That's going to be interesting to see because, the sugar tax has led to more and more companies cutting the amount of sugar they use in products, but also increasing the amount of sugar-free products they make. So if that kind of comes to pass, our lorry's going to move to maybe smaller, whatever the back half of the lorry's called, the thing that transports the goods, or just not bother coming here. That's probably going to be what happens. It's just ridiculous. These people are clowns. There seems to be a case for more intervention here because it's not fit for purpose, he said. Merriman said lorry drivers he had spoken to during the visit often were not given money by their employer to stay overnight at a proper lorry park. Now, I think it depends on which lorry drivers they would speak to, because some are paid by the hour, and I think some are paid depending on kilometres. They're paid by the kilometre, so if you're not travelling, then I doubt you'd be paid. The problem is, it's because of the way contracts are and you have two different systems, it's quite confusing. It's possible that Hugh Merriman has spoken to the lorry drivers who are paid more by kilometre and therefore would not be paid for overnight stays. He referred to a £32 million fund the government had injected into the transport budget to improve lorry park provisions. And again, lorries were drivers, HGV drivers were treated badly before Brexit. If things are pretty bad now still, but also for different reasons. But the thing that we need to remember is that this £32 million fund would not have been needed pre-Brexit, because we wouldn't have needed such big lorry parks. Saying that the company motto had told him it had spent £40 million on providing 100 spaces at a site it ran in Rugby, but had taken 13 years to get through planning permission. And this is kind of a further indictment on councils and planning permission. But I doubt the council in Rugby would want to grant planning permission for lorry parks because they're not great, are they? And, it's a NIMBY thing. I think people don't want lorry parks in their areas. Baroness Veer said she accepted there were problems with the planning process because of the different number of agencies involved, and do you know who could change that? The government. The government could fundamentally change this, But we've seen Brexiteers complain about planning permission, even though planning permission isn't regulated by the EU. So it's just crazy. Hauliers were circumspect. Paul Nunnery of the Road Haulage Association said, "Our industry already pays for these facilities when drivers pay to use them." Now, the question is, who do you believe in this case? Hugh Merriman, or do you believe Paul Nunnery of the Road Haulage Association? It's possible that the people Hugh Merriman spoke to gave him that information. It's hard to know, but I would go with Paul Nunnery of the Road Haulage Association. Our industry already pays for these facilities when drivers pay to use them. The issue is not so much paying for them, but a lack of willingness in local authorities to give them the go-ahead. So essentially what I think Paul Nunnery is saying is the lack of access to these facilities, and the fact that councils won't enable them. So there's nowhere for a lorry driver to access these kind of lorry parks, because they don't exist. I think that's what Paul Nunnery is saying. Elizabeth de Jong, Logistics UK Director of Policy, said overnight lorry parking and driver facilities are essentially to support the logistics industry, but despite the urgent need to resolve this issue, it is not the responsibility of the sector to build and run truck stops, which is true. It's not the responsibility of the logistics agency to run them. What the logistics agency really is there to do in this context is to tell the driver, look, you're going to say drop this off in Birmingham, and then there's a truck stop in Wolverhampton you can stay at. And then after that you can pick up something from, say, Wolverhampton or somewhere near Birmingham, etc. The haulage industry is not meant to run these truck stops. It doesn't make sense. And so her point is that the government have studies that have highlighted commercial appetite to build and run these sites. So the private sector undoubtedly wants to build these places, to build these truck stops, but it's a lack of land and planning permission that has led to a market failure. So essentially they're blaming the government and the way planning permission and other things are that have stopped more truck stops being built, because there aren't a lot, even where I live in the Midlands, there aren't a lot of truck stops in the town. Once these barriers are overcome, this should lead to a commercially viable sector where intervention is no longer needed. So I think her point is that you keep saying, that it's not for the haulage industry to sort this out for a start, and then you can't blame the private sector, because there's no the planning permission's a nightmare to get. One company, it took 13 years to get this, so that means they applied for this when Labour were in charge. That's crazy. And so a lack of land and planning approval. So the private sector can't build things when there's no planning permission given for them. There's nothing they can do apart from maybe try and bribe councillors, but that's illegal. So unless you want the private sector to commit to illegal activities, not much is going to happen here. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. This is blatantly a stealth tax if the government do implement it. I'm late to this one. I've been sick. I don't want to hear it. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one, and support the channel on Patreon if you can.